Joe, good to see you.
Hi.
Thanks for coming on GB News. Where do you think public opinion is? Do the public want these COVID passes? It was a very tight vote in the Welsh Assembly, wasn't it? So much so that it was only a technicality that actually led to the vote going through.
Well, it's one of those classic examples where public opinion may be different in principle from what's actually happening in practice. When you ask people about the principle of vaccine passports, so not ignoring the fact that you can also include lateral flow tests in what's happening in Wales, a majority of people support their introduction in principle for attending certain public places. And when you ask, would you personally be comfortable with using them, 75% of people support them. And that's true across all the different parts of the country, Wales, Scotland, and the rest of the United Kingdom. And there is a change to do with age, but that's closely linked to whether you're vaccinated or not. Given how many people are now vaccinated, I would see a large support in principle. But of course, it will come down to what it's like for people in terms of day-to-day experience. If it means greatly increased queues, if it means huge problems with downloading apps, installing functionality and that sort of thing, that may change. But certainly, at the moment, the support is there.
I'm guessing, but you may tell me I'm wrong, that lockdown, a full lockdown, is the public's worst option. So is there support for those things that are far less restrictive but may help to control the spread, like mask wearing on public transport, working from home for those that can work from home? Because that's not happening, certainly in England. But and you really notice that mask wearing is really declining on public transport now, really rapidly. Where are the public on those less intrusive measures to control COVID?
Well, you say that full lockdown is the worst thing, and in a sense that's true. But of course, what people are most concerned about is no kind of restrictions at all. That's what they fear the most, because there's still, even after however many months it is, 18 months now, of this situation continuing, there's still a concern about the short-term health implications. And so people are still worried. And generally speaking, this has been true throughout the pandemic, people have erred on the side of caution when they respond to surveys. So that means, yes, they support masks, yes, they support vaccine passports, and so on and so forth. But again, in actuality, and many of us will have seen it, the proportion of people wearing masks is declining, as of course the coverage of COVID is reducing. That could, of course, still all change, particularly in the run-up to Christmas. And if there are concerns about rising cases, but particularly if there's a concern over a new variant, and I'm not saying it will happen, but of course it could happen, then the public opinion landscape could change completely and very quickly.
Joe, we're asking you to monitor public opinion, which of course is very difficult, very inexact science, though you do your best, as do the other pollsters. But how about combining that with a crystal ball as well? So as you've just said in response to Gloria, there is broad support for COVID passes, there's broad support for mask wearing, there's concern about no restrictions whatsoever. What do you think would happen to public opinion if we went back to full lockdown?
I think it depends entirely on the context in which it was introduced. If we see if we see a new variant that's going absolutely crazy, there's no doubt the public would support that. If, under the existing variants, we see, particularly in the run-up to Christmas, a rising number of hospital admissions and fatalities. So
they're the key things, right?
They're the key things. Hospital admissions and fatalities. If the NHS is presented as understretched, if people perceive it as being understretched, and crucially, if Christmas is perceived as being at risk, then I can see the public being on board. If, however, it's just randomly presented that, let's say, half term, everyone's got to lock down for a fire break, that's not going to win people over. It all depends on the circumstances and the context, as it has done now for 18 months.
What have you learned about the British people as we have gone through this pandemic? What has surprised you most about their attitudes?
Well, it's not so much what has surprised me, but I have been surprised to the degree to which others are surprised, if you like, about how restrictive British people are. And of course, if you work, as I do, looking at these stats day in, day out, year after year, you see that there is a strong level of support for quite tight controls of the British people by a sizable minority of the British population. And so to see that come out in practice really doesn't surprise me. I'm surprised that other people think, oh, what? So people want to see these restrictions kept in place even when the situation has improved. And yes, that doesn't surprise me. And it's by no means everyone. But there's always this sort of hardcore of the public that believes that the army is always the answer, that the politicians can't be trusted at all, and that the answer is for everyone to stay indoors, no matter what the problem.
And what's your broader take, Joe, on the opinion polls? We've seen the Tories ahead in almost all opinion polls over recent months. There's been one or two where Keir Starmer's got some headway, and even one or two where Labour have been ahead. Is the broad picture here that lockdown's generally quite popular, even though lots of people find it annoying, they feel it's necessary, so the Prime Minister is benefiting from that?
What I would say is that lockdown is part of the picture. It's all about, at the moment at least, whether the public perceives that the government is doing a good job or a bad job in dealing with coronavirus. And at the times over the last 18 months where it's been seen as doing a bad job, for instance, when Christmas was cancelled and so on and so forth, we've seen government support for, we've seen Labour ahead. But since certainly the vaccination programme came into place and people have perceived that to be a success, and overall the government is seen to be doing the right thing, what we see then is the Conservatives consistently ahead. But, of course, it's not about the last 18 months, it's about the next year or 2 years. Once things start to return more to normal, once the British public out there starts thinking about things that we would all think about in normal times, education, taxation, immigration, all of these normal issues, that's when really everything's still up to play for, because there's a lot of potentially very difficult times ahead for the Conservative Party once COVID is, if not out of the way, then at least reduced. And so there's no guarantee that this lead will be maintained because polls are only ever a snapshot and there's a lot to come.
And I normally err on the side of caution, like the rest of the British people, when it comes to restrictions. But when it comes to COVID passports, the one thing that really I struggle with is the fact that the vaccine doesn't prevent transmission. And I'm thinking logically, well, how can this be a good idea if even if you're double jabbed, you can still transmit the disease? However, if it incentivises young people to get the jab, then that's a noble enough public policy goal, even though that is not the intended objective of COVID passports.
Yeah, and also if it encourages people to get out and go to such events. And so if people are, let's say, erring on the side of caution, they think, oh, actually, if there are unvaccinated people there, I'm worried about it. Whereas if everyone there is vaccinated, yes, it may still be transmitted, but of course, if everyone is double vaccinated, your chance of transmitting it is reduced and your chance of catching it is significantly reduced. I'm not saying it's zero, but it is a significantly perceived to be a significantly safer environment. And so that means restaurants, theatres, sporting events can all open up to a degree to which they weren't able to open under previous restrictions, or at least people were concerned about them under previous restrictions.
Very interesting. Joe Twyman, founder and director of Deltapoll. We really appreciate you coming in. Thanks for joining us.